A meeting of the Vermont Citizens Advisory Committee on Lake Champlain. Mark Knott, our chair, is traveling today, so I will be facilitating chairing the meeting tonight. Welcome to everybody. Welcome to our guests. Do we want to go around, Katie, and just do a quick round of introductions?
Sure.
Sure. I'm happy to call on people if that's easier. So go ahead, May Kate, since you shook your head.
All right, thanks, Denise. Hi, everyone. I'm May K. Campbell. I'm the Associate Scientist with the Lake Champlain Basin Program. Nice to be here tonight.
Thanks, May Kate. I'm going to go ahead to Eric Clifford.
Yes, hello. I'm Eric Clifford, member of CAC and a dairy farmer in Starksboro, Vermont.
Hi, Eric. Go ahead, Pierre.
I'm Pierre Leduc, chair of the Quebec CAC. I'm mostly here to answer any questions during the CAC coordination part of the agenda at 6:15. And I may turn my camera and my mic off in the meantime. Nice to be here.
Thank you. And Hillary.
Hi everyone. It's Hillary Solomon with the Poultney Meadowy Conservation District and a member of the CAC. Thanks.
Great. Karina.
Hi everyone, I'm Karina Daly with, I'm a restoration ecologist with Vermont Natural Resources Council and a member of the CAC. It's good having seen some of these faces for the first time at the Saranac Lake, so good to see you all again.
That's fun. Wayne Elliott.
Hello, good evening. Wayne Elliott. I'm a consulting engineer with Aldridge & Elliott and a member of the CAC and live in South Burlington, Vermont.
Great. Thank you. I think that's it for CAC members and Basin program staff. Am I correct on that, Katie?
I think so, yeah. That's all I have for the CAC.
All right, happy to go to our guests this evening. I see Cree Lintelak.
Hi all, Cree Lintelak with the Lintelak Foundation from Shelburne and a member of the Water Caucus.
Great, nice to see you, Cree. Kent Henderson.
Good evening. Happy to sit in on this with this esteemed group again. I'm the chair of the Friends of Northern Lake Champlain, and be very interested in hearing comments, especially from Josh and Pierre this evening.
Great, thank you. Marley Ruth.
Hi there, folks. Nice to see some of you again. Marley Roop, Ag Water Quality with the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. I'm filling in for Sarah Coleman, who is unavailable to be here tonight.
Great, nice to see you, Marley. Thank you. Let's see, Juliana White.
Oh. Hi, everyone. My name is Juliana White. I am just listening in for a few. I have about 20 minutes. I'm just listening in to hear more about what this group is doing. Thank you for all your work.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us, Juliana. James Maroney.
James Maroney from Leicester, Vermont.
Great, thanks. Hi, James. I think the only person that I'm missing might be Josh Faulkner. Do we want to go ahead and have you introduce yourself, Josh, now, or do you want to do that when you? Yeah, great, thank you.
I'm on it. Yeah. Hey, good evening. Good to be here with you. Joshua Faulkner. I'm a research assistant professor with UVM Extension, and am excited to talk about some of the work we're doing in Extension here in just a little bit.
Excellent. Does anybody currently have anything to report or share for public comments? All right, so the third item on our agenda, I don't believe we have a quorum, however, Katie, am I accurate in that?
Yeah,
to be able we're two people shy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. So we will skip the action item on our reviewing and voting on our draft July 26th meeting summary. So I think that takes us right into Lake Champlain Basin staff program updates.
Yep, so Meg is not able to be here tonight to provide our standing Round Goby update, but she'll be able to provide a pretty robust update on Round Goby and aquatic invasive species in the Boat Launch Steward program season roundup at our next meeting. But you can stay up to date on all the Round Goby news by visiting the Round Goby webpage on the Basin Programs website. Another thing I wanted to bring to this group's attention was that on October 31st, the New York CAC is meeting and they will be having a presentation from Dave Wick from the Lake George Park Commission about the septic committee's findings and the proposed septic inspection regulation. So I know that septic has been a big interest for this group. So if you're available to attend, I'll send the registration details out with the meeting follow-up materials. Those meetings typically aren't recorded, but I might be able to record just that section of the meeting so we can have that as a record and share that out with folks who aren't able to attend. That's it from me. May Kate is going to provide some updates about the wrap up of the IJC flood study. Yeah, thanks. So Katie asked me to just bring you all up to date with the IJC Lake Champlain Richelieu River flood study. So the final report for the flood study was released a couple weeks ago. There was a public comment period and a number of public meetings were held. That public comment period has since closed. So the IJC is taking into consideration the public comments they received to take the report from the recommendations that the board made to the IJC. They're going to potentially tweak those and then provide those recommendations to the governments. So it will be up to the governments to take any next steps coming out of those recommendations. There's a number of supporting reports that are just finishing up in the production pipeline. So there's still a number of reports that will be published coming off of the study. Everything is available on the study website, which I will drop a link to in the chat. And if you have any questions about that, happy to answer them now. Great, back to you, Katie. Yeah, that's it for Basin Program updates. So we're early on the agenda, which is nice.
All right, so the next item on the agenda is actually our presentation from Dr. Faulkner from the UVM. He's a research assistant professor and farming and climate change program coordinator. He's going to present on the impacts of climate change on Vermont agriculture and how agriculture may help achieve climate and water quality related goals. Really happy to have you here with us, Josh. I did not share my screen, did I? I meant to, sorry. I'm going to turn it over to you if you're
Turn it
ready.
over to me. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you. I appreciate the introduction. Give me just a moment and I will get some slides up on your screens, hopefully.
You're able to share. Yep, it's starting to pop up. Perfect.
You can see it? Great.
Yep, we can see it. Thanks, Josh.
Okay, yeah, you bet. So I work with UVM Extension. I'm a soil and water engineer by training, and I do a lot of work that focuses on climate change and really for Vermont and Vermont agriculture. A lot of that centers around moisture extremes and how farmers manage their soil and manage the water that comes across their farms. And so I want to do kind of three different things in the course of this presentation. I want to kind of give you a high-level overview of what impacts climate change is having on Vermont farms, talk a little bit about how farms are adapting, what strategies and management practices they're using, but then also talk a bit about some of the research and extension programs we have that are trying to understand more about those practices and those strategies and the effects of climate change on agriculture in Vermont. And I know many of you, and I apologize, I think you've seen me give some of these slides multiple times, so I hope you can stick with me, and maybe I'll have a few new things for you as well. So Okay. So in addition to being a research assistant professor, I also was the first person to kind of take the role of farming and climate change program coordinator, and kudos to UVM. I think we're the first land grant university in the country to start a program that was explicitly focused on farming and climate change, trying to help farmers adapt to the impacts of climate change. And that was really, I think, driven by Tropical Storm Irene, which you're seeing a shot on your screen after Irene, kind of did its damage in New England and Vermont. And when I started, a lot of my work was immediately focused on helping farmers adapt to climate change. And some of that has transitioned now because of the growing interest in mitigation of climate change. And so some of the newer projects, and I'll be able to touch on that at the end, have moved away from adaptation, really moved into kind of trying to understand what potential there is for mitigation. Sequestering carbon or avoiding greenhouse gas emissions on farms. Okay. So starting with climate impacts, it's been getting wetter. We all know that in the Northeast as a whole, really, we've seen over the past century an increase of about 4 inches in our annual average precipitation, which is that blue trend line you're seeing across your screen. However, when we look at climate district specific data from Vermont, really in the past 30 years, we see a very different story. We see increases of up to 9 inches in the Northeast Kingdom, 7 inches in the Champlain Valley, and 5 inches in southern Vermont. And so if you kind of compare those two, that regional average, that's multiple generations on a farm, 4 inches over a century, easy, really fairly easy for farmers to adapt to. But then this change of 9 inches in 30 years, that's really significant. In many cases, that could be 1 generation on the farm, and that is truly a challenge. And I think one of two primary impacts of climate change on Vermont agriculture. And really, we see this in production numbers. This is the pie chart you're seeing here is risk management agency data collected by the USDA that's based on why crop insurance payments are made to Vermont farmers. This is from 2001 to 2010. And it's clearly, the biggest, over half of this pie is due to excess moisture. And so that's really part of that, increasing precipitation, especially during the planting season and the harvest season, and the impacts that those critical times during the year this excess moisture is having. It's interesting when you move out of New England to the south and to the west, this pie starts to look very different, and drought, the piece of pie, which is only 7% for us, gets much, much bigger. And that excess moisture portion of the pie gets much smaller. The other, I said there were two primary impacts of climate change, I think, and the other one is not just that it's getting wetter, it's that the patterns of precipitation are changing. We see this is really kind of well understood in the general public now, that there's more extreme storms than there used to be. This figure is from one of the recent national climate assessments, where we're seeing, a 74% increase in very heavy precipitation events in the Northeast. And so those are events that are over 1 inch in 24 hours. And this is truly, I think, the headline story for us for climate change, and unique to our region to some degree. The other parts of the country are seeing increases in extreme events, but nowhere near to the degree that we are. And it's interesting when, I go on farms, and I go on a lot of farms and talk with folks, and no matter where someone's, politics are, their kind of acceptance of climate change, everyone can agree on this, that storms are so much heavier than they used to be when they were growing up on that farm, when they were farming 30 years ago. And I think that's really interesting. It's made outreach on this topic kind of an easy thing to do, because everyone can kind of agree on this and say that we need to take action in terms of how we manage our soil because of these extreme events. And then of course these events do have real impacts on farms. This is me standing in a gully in a cornfield in Chittenden County after a single storm event in 2014 or 2015. And I'm about 6'3", and this gully, it's almost up to my hip pocket on my jeans there. This is quite a loss of topsoil, and I think we all understand what that means. For the farm to rebuild this topsoil is a major thing. And I have kind of a grin on my face, and that's because I'd never really seen erosion like this outside of class, in college, looking at photos from the Dust Bowl, and then to come to Vermont and within a year or two of arriving here and actually see this in a field was kind of a very guilty but exciting moment for me to see this in real life, this type of erosion. And then I have a modeling projection there on the screen, top right-hand corner, from some USDA scientists that really caught my attention. And that was published almost 20 years ago, where they estimated that erosion would increase at this disproportionate rate compared to the annual rainfall increases. And this was taken from Midwestern modeling scenarios, but it should really give us pause, even here in Vermont, and their corn silage and hay systems, that this climate change, especially given our increase in rainfall, that we have a lot of work to do, and it's going to be a hard road to hoe. And then, of course, it's not just loss of topsoils that farms are facing. It's literally just losses of entire pieces of productive land. This is a farmer, Geo Honeyford, in South Royalton after Tropical Storm Irene. And just, right there in the floodplain, losing land, really valuable land. These soils, of course, are some of the most productive soils we have, really important in Vermont, given our hilly topography. These fertile, just well-drained, really great alluvial soils in the river valleys are just exactly what we need to continue to farm and build a local food system, but they're really right in the crosshairs of climate change because of their proximity to these channels, these rivers. And then I'll just show one more photo. This is I kind of keep a horror show of erosion in a slide deck, and I just wanted to show this one. This is last year or was it 2 years ago? Actually in the Connecticut basin. This is very close to the Connecticut, just across the border in New Hampshire. And this is a cornfield that just started to erode as they received 30 inches of rain over 2 months. You can see once that head cut starts, it just goes down, 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 and just tremendous. You can see the line of topsoil there, and of course lost way more than topsoil during that 2 months of when this erosion occurred. And then we all know this, we're all in a watershed, right? We're all in smaller watersheds and then bigger watersheds, and much of those soils, those topsoils that are eroded, of course, end up in surface waters, and they cause problems there as well. This is just an image that I use fairly often that shows the Connecticut River after Tropical Storm Irene, just belching out all that sediment it collected from the land, and not just farms, of course other sources as well, into Long Island Sound. And we know, of course, that this is not just sediment. This is the nutrients that piggyback along with that sediment. Phosphorus is tied tightly to that sediment. So, and then of course, if we're losing soil, we're also losing nitrogen and other organic matter from the landscape as well. That all ends up there in that receiving water. And then this is old data, but I think it's still the point of this slide still rings very true. This shows several modeling scenarios done by Tetra Tech during the development of the TMDL and showing total phosphorus loads to Lake Champlain. And there's lots of scenarios here, the different colored bars, with the blue on the far left being the baseline scenario, but then kind of the point being that every single scenario outside of the baseline, every single climate change scenario outside of the baseline leads to some level of increase in total phosphorus load to the lake. And this is, of course, like I said, this climate change and water quality are so tightly linked. And I think this slide really makes that point very clear that we have, farmers are doing an amazing amount of work, but there's still, it's really a steep hill to climb. So we have more work to do. And then you're probably familiar with this as well. I love to show this this figure that shows the ice updates on Lake Champlain, with the little red diamonds being years when the lake did not freeze up, and then you can see that after 1950, it's fairly rare that the lake does freeze up, and pre-1950 is fairly rare that the lake did not freeze up. And this is really convincing for those who are questioning the science of climate change, because we see it very evident here in these data from Lake Champlain. And then of course this leads directly into the fact that our receiving waters are becoming warmer, and when our receiving waters become warmer, they're more susceptible to the eutrophication processes than the harmful algal blooms that we're trying to prevent. So it's kind of this double whammy, right? We have the rain and the extreme events on the landscape that lead to more erosion and nutrient loss, but then our receiving waters are much more susceptible as well because they're warming. In addition to these rainfall changes, we also see probably the silver lining of climate change is that we have an increased length of the growing season in the Northeast and in Vermont if you compare 1991 to 2012, 1991 through 2012 to 1901 to 1960, we've seen about a 10-day increase in that growing season in the Northeast. And then more specifically in Vermont, we did an analysis in the last, not the one that was just released, but the previous Vermont climate assessment, looking at Vermont specific data, and we see the growing season getting longer by about 3.7 days per decade. So there's some good news here for farms who are looking to grow crops that are more typical of the mid-Atlantic and maybe expanding into newer varieties as well. So all these observations and really, I'm not going to talk much about projections, but really it's kind of more of the same, I guess, is what I would say about climate change projections for the future. But how do these changes and projections affect crops? And for starters, we think that our cooler season crops will be of lower yield or quality. And so there's been some work done in New York by Cornell that has specifically identified sweet corn as susceptible to this. Sweet corn growers enjoy a market advantage because of the mellow growing season and producing really high quality sweet corn with the hotter summers and the disrupted growing conditions that growers may lose that market edge there. We may see reduced grain yields because it's warmer. Crops may mature quicker, but even though they mature quicker, they will not reach their full yield potential. And in addition to not reaching their full yield potential, they may not have the nutrient profile that we would expect during a longer, mellow, slower growing season that we might be more typical or longer time to reach maturity. I won't say longer growing season, but where it took crops longer to reach that matured level. Reduced vernalization, tree fruit, of course, is very important for Vermont. We At some point, we may see this reduced vernalization during the winter time, which is critical for those chilling hours are critical for our apple crops. This is currently expected to become a problem more in southeastern Pennsylvania and northern Virginia in the near future, and not really expected to affect us anytime soon. But what is very real and has been documented as probably the primary threat for apple growers is the increased risk of frost during the spring, where we have, maybe there's a warm period in the late winter, and our trees bud out, and then we have that late frost, which can be really damaging to the apple crop. New pests are potentially able to overwinter. And there's a lot of debate about, what's driving some of the newer pests. Is it climate change or is it other vectors? Really, it's kind of a moot point, because once they're here, it's definitely true. There's no disagreement that climate change will make the overwintering and the environment more hospitable to those new pests that arrive. Spotted wing Drosophila, that's one of key concern. And there's an image of that on the lower right-hand corner, and Cornell estimates that this will do $3 million worth of damage just to the New York State soft fruit crop every year if we don't control this guy. And then there's that silver lining again. Some of our warmer season crops may do better. A lot of experimentation with red wine grapes that previously were not so successful here in our climate. Peaches and melons, those heat-loving crops that you used to be able to have to drive a good bit further south to get. Our farmers may be able to do better with those. And then what I didn't mention, kind of glazed over, was as the patterns of precipitation change, we are getting wetter on an annual basis, but with those extreme events, especially during the summertime, the moisture is all packaged up in those really intense events, and then we're seeing more and more droughty periods that are in between those intense events. So we're seeing more water stress in crops, especially in our high value crops, our vegetables, our specialty crops, fruits and vegetables. And there's been some good modeling work that's projected that by what I'm showing here is an increase in irrigation withdrawals is expected to be 1.75 times what it was in 2005 by the year 2090. So this is some work that was done for every state in the country, and we're right there in the middle of the pack. And that y-axis on the left shows that we land about 1.75 times the amount of water needed in 2090 compared to 2005. And there's no question, we hear this loud and clear from vegetable growers. There's just surging interest in drip irrigation and irrigation infrastructure of all kinds, and we're trying to do our best to keep up with that and understand what modern technology may be available for farmers to better schedule their irrigation applications to meet and to bridge these droughty periods during the summertime. And then there's impacts on livestock as well. And I'm probably not the best one in the room to talk about this. I'm sure Kent knows a lot about this, but with heat stress, we see surprising, I guess heat stress causes problems that's what we might consider surprisingly low levels in dairy cattle. And this can reduce dry matter intake by 10 to 20%, and then that, of course, reduces milk production, and in some cases can actually disrupt reproductive cycles. This is well known to our dairy farmers. And then the most recent data or modeling work we have on this shows this was done for different parts of the Northeast, how days of heat stress may be increasing as time marches forward with climate change. And you can see we're the blue line on the bottom, and here around 2020, We were somewhere around 20 days of heat stress per year. But then by mid-century 2050, that may very well double based upon this work. We're still quite a bit lower than some of our neighbors in the Northeast, but a doubling, potential doubling by mid-century. And of course, this means, for grazing farmers, this probably means a greater investment in shade structures and how pastures are oriented and utilization of trees. And of course, for confinement operations, it means a greater investment in ventilation is going to be needed. Okay, so that's a lot of kind of, I guess I would like to get the bad news out of the way up front. And now I do want to kind of move into talking about what farmers are doing and what practices are showing promise for helping them adapt to this changing climate. And really, I think key amongst all of these, really, whether it's too much water or too little water, is building soil health. And to me, I'm like I said, I'm an engineer. I'm a little bit of a reductionist. This is kind of, I boil it down to 3 principles, and it's more complicated than that. But I think if someone keeps these 3 principles at top of mind as they manage their soils, they do really well at building a healthy, resilient soil that helps to absorb all this incoming precipitation and is resistant to erosion, helps form strong aggregates, so on and so forth. So just want to kind of walk through these principles and talk a little bit about them and what practices these would entail. So the first one, constant soil cover. This, preferably living cover, but just physical cover in and of itself goes a long way to preventing the types of erosion we saw in those images that I showed earlier. If you can imagine, raindrops actually hit the soil surface with an amazing amount of momentum, and those, when they do, they blow apart those soil particles, the soil aggregates that a lot of farmers work really hard to build. And when they do, the individual pieces of sand, silt, and clay fall back on the soil surface, and they fill in the pores and they create surface sealing. And that's why when you have a rainstorm, it's a really dry summer, and you have a tilled field and you have a heavy rainstorm, and you think, thank goodness we've got some rain. You walk out there and you kick back, and maybe the top ½ inch of soil is wet and it's dry as a bone underneath. That's when you had surface sealing, because there was no physical cover to protect the soil aggregates from being disintegrated and then sealing the surface over. So that's just plain soil cover, dead soil cover, just some sort of physical, barrier. And then living cover, even better. This is when we're starting to get into the realm of cover crops and all the benefits that the cover crops can provide, and not just in this first bullet point, but the other 2 as well. They're adding carbon to the soil through root exudates. They're scavenging nutrients. They're just, and they're covering. They're rooted, so they're not going to blow off like some residues. Just really, in terms of selection of soil cover, the living is the better. Then our second point here is building organic matter, and this is important because of biology. And so if we think of organic matter as really the fuel for soil biology, and so soil biology is what does the work of building that well aggregated soil that transmits water so well and soaks up incoming heavy storms. So the more we can feed the biology in the soil by building organic matter, the better chance we have at building a really well structured soil that's going to be resilient to these storms. Building organic matter can be done in several different ways that farmers are using many of those, from adding composts as a fertility source, adding manure as a fertility source, fantastic for adding organic matter to the soil, leaving crop residues on the soil when possible, and then of course using cover crops because of their ability to add organic matter as well. And then our third point here, reduced disturbance and trying to maintain soil structure. And this is all about tillage. And so this is, when we till a soil, we do a couple things. First we expose some of the organic matter that's in deeper layers to the atmosphere, and through that we oxidize that organic matter and that carbon, and so we lose that from the soil. But we also destroy some of the aggregates, and we also destroy some of the macro structure of the soil. So if you kind of think about that biology, there's critters that like to live at the kind of the surface layers, and then at deeper layers, and then even deeper layers. And we go through with the tillage equipment, it's like, kind of just really just wreaking havoc on all that biological habitat within the soil. And it takes that biology time to rebuild their habitat, and so we're kind of setting them back every time we till. So the less we can till, the better. And farmers are really, it's been amazing just in my time in Vermont how much we've seen no tillage and reduced tillage practices advance forward, especially when they're used in conjunction with cover crops. So farmers are, and even in vegetable systems, which were the holy grail of vegetable, tillage, was a no-till vegetable system. And there's some farms on the eastern part of the state that are making progress on that, and there are a lot of people who are looking to learn how to do that type of production without tillage. And I'll just show an image here. This is one of my favorite tools. I usually show a lot of data, kind of highlighting the impact of all these three principles, but I'm just going to kind of keep it a little bit briefer here. And I just want to show this one slide that makes a lot of the points that I was trying to kind of discuss in that previous slide. And this is a rainfall simulator. I think many of you have seen this. And this is a demonstration that I set up several years ago. And I took two slices of soil from the same farm, literally not side by side, in a cornfield, and put them beside one another on this table. They're in the red box there. And then I've just put some straw mulch on the top of one of them. And then what you can't see, there's a sprinkler head just out of the frame of this picture above. And then you can turn on that sprinkler head and rain on these soils at a fairly intense rate. And what you capture during that storm event is runoff in the front buckets, and then you capture infiltration in the back buckets that are kind of tucked back under the table. And so what we see on these two slices of tilled soil on the left is just the complete opposite in terms of the volume of runoff from the bare soil is equal to the volume of infiltration in the soil that just had some physical cover on it. And not only is it the volume of water, but then of course the color of the water as well, right? So we have kind of a chunky chocolate milk looking water that's just loaded with sediment and nutrients coming off the one on the left, and then a relatively much clearer water that's infiltrated through that soil in the soil on the right hand side. And then the proof's in the pudding with the front buckets. A front bucket is empty on the one on the right, and the back bucket's empty on the one on the left. So you can see truly that this is, what doesn't infiltrate has to run off, right? And what doesn't run off will of course infiltrate. So, and then I'm not going to get into this much, but on the right hand side of the screen, you could really kind of talk about this slide for 15 minutes. We have three slices of sod, and one is a poorly managed pasture right there in the middle. It's just, let's say the middle of the entire table. This is hard to do on Teams. I'd like to be there in person and kind of point this out. And then the next one to the right is a well-managed pasture, and then the slice of soil far right of the table is a perennial hayfield. And then you can see kind of this gradient of volume of runoff and volume of infiltration from each of those soils. And that's a direct result of kind of the root, the organic matter that comes from the roots and the biology and the aggregation and, the lack of compaction in a well-managed pasture. And there's just, there's so much to talk about there. But farmers are really getting tuned in to this and how their soil management affects these hydrologic mechanisms and nutrient transport pathways. Okay, so now I just want to talk a little bit about some of the work that we're doing to understand the effects of some of the conservation practices that farms are using. And I'll talk about several different projects, but I want to start here at the watershed scale. And this is a newer project. It's called CEAP, C-E-A-P, which stands for Conservation Effects Assessment Project. And this is funded by NRCS, and we have lots of state partners that are really helping support this from DEC and Agency of Ag, USGS at the federal level, ARS at the federal level as well. But this, there's many of these watersheds around the country. We're the first one to be established in the Northeast in over 15 years. But the objective is to evaluate the effect of USDA funded conservation practices at the watershed scale. Now, you think we would know the answer to that question, but truly we don't. In every little, unique climate and unique farming system within the country. And so this is an effort to try to answer that question for the context of Vermont, given our climate, given our soils, and given the way we farm. And so the way we do this is we set up flow gauges on several streams throughout the basin. Ours are located in Addison County, and I have a couple slides that show exactly what watersheds those are. And then we collect samples, water quality samples, both of base flow and of stormwater samples. So we're sampling, during when it's not raining, and we're also sampling when we get, heavy storms and we get runoff and the flow starts to increase. And then in addition to that, we're also, as important, we're also documenting land use and management practices on every field, on every farm within those watersheds. And this is truly a monumental challenge for us. The science, the hard science, and the collection of water samples is fairly easy compared to this last bullet point. But I think we're doing fairly well so far at this. So our watersheds where we're doing this are, like I said, in Addison County. We have 2 treatment watersheds, we call them, which is the west branch of the Dead Creek and the east branch of the Dead Creek. And if you're familiar with the county, the east branch of the Dead Creek is monitored on Town Line Road, and the west branch of the Dead Creek is monitored on Norton Town Road. And this encompasses about 15,000 acres of ag land, or total land, and 75% of that is in agricultural land use. And these are all heavy soils characteristic of this part of the state. And then our control watershed is the Little Otter Creek, and this is about 22,000 acres. Again, lots of heavy clay soils, also some lighter soils in this watershed as well, and it's about 50% ag land use. And this is we have our station on the Little Otter as Moncton Road crosses the Little Otter, if you're familiar with that area just east of Virgins. Okay, and what we're also doing along with this to tie this back into some of the soil health discussion, we're also looking at soil health within kind of a shotgun approach of fields within these watersheds, and then taking a baseline last year and then taking another sampling of those same fields several years from now to see if our soil health results correlate with our water quality signal that we're tracking in those basins. We're we certainly think that soil health is good for water quality, but there's little actual evidence to support that at the watershed scale. So we want to go ahead and make sure that we're doing our due diligence and we're trying to understand to what degree increased soil health has or doesn't have an effect on water quality. And then another way farmers are responding to climate change, and I think kind of where I sit, it's probably the number one way those growing field crops are responding is through installation of tile drainage to adapt to those wetter conditions. But this is really complicated. You know, this has huge benefits for the farm, and it changes the field hydrology. In some cases, it has actually helped eliminate gullies and certainly reduces surface runoff because we have more runoff going out through the subsurface. But then there are some very real concerns about transport of nutrients through the subsurface pathways. So that's we have quite a bit of work focused on this right now, and this is just, in my mind, driven so much by climate change. This installation of tile drains, and then we're seeing this follow-on issue of potentially at least a change in hydrology and potentially increase in subsurface flux of nutrients. So we're trying to answer a lot of questions related to that with field scale research in many instances, and so we have I think I have 17 monitoring stations set up around the state, looking at both surface runoff and subsurface runoff from fields that are tile drained and in some cases undrained, and then tracking export through time. And I just have a couple slides here showing some data of one particular field in Addison County, and this just shows across almost an entire year our different monitored storm events and the pounds of phosphorus that we measured coming out of those tile outlets during those storm events. And when you kind of crunch all this data across the entire year, we see about 1.4 pounds per acre per year of phosphorus being discharged through tile drains at this field. And we have several other fields. This is just one field. Some other fields where that is generally the range that we're seeing being discharged. And the other thing we're seeing is that about 96%, well over 90% of the phosphorus that's exported from these fields in tile drainage flow occurs during storm events. It's not that base flow, that kind of slow drain of the water table during the spring or through the winter time. That is not where phosphorus is being discharged. It's during the storm events. And then we're also tracking nitrogen as well. Of course, I know we're less concerned about nitrogen in the Champlain Basin than we are in the Connecticut Basin, but just wanted to show some really interesting data here that shows that in that same field over that same time period where we only measured 1.4 pounds per acre of phosphorus, we measured 71 pounds per acre of nitrogen. And so maybe not a water quality concern yet. It may be at some point, but certainly something that represents a cost to the farm. If this nitrogen is being lost to drainage, it can't be used for crop production. And there's a lot of things we can do in terms of adapting to nitrogen timing and understanding. We know quite a bit about how nitrogen behaves when it's released into the soil, and so there's quite a bit of work I think we can do here around reducing this and improving nitrogen use efficiency, especially given how expensive nitrogen has become in the past year or two. And then a last field scale project I just want to briefly touch on. This is called Discovery Acres or Discovery Farms Vermont, and this is a project that I work on with Heather Darby, and this is up in the St. Albans Bay, just right off St. Albans Bay. And this is where we have several large plots set up within a field And we have 2 of those plots that are undrained and 2 of those plots that are drained. And we're going to be doing various soil health management practices on these fields and understanding not just the effect of the best management practices, but the effect of the tile drainage in conjunction with those best management practices. And so this is, this is one of those $1 million questions of how does tile really affect the overall loss of phosphorus from the field. We know it, of course, decreases surface runoff, but increases subsurface. But on balance, does it actually increase P loss or not? So we hope to be able to answer some of those questions with this work. And then we have farmers also to address this phosphorus loss in the subsurface, very interested in phosphorus filters. And I think you've probably seen or heard of these at some point in time. These are literally media filters that are placed at the outlet of tile drains, and the soluble phosphorus sorbs to the media as the water passes through these filters. And we have built several of these now. This is an image of a subsurface filter on your left-hand side of the screen during construction. So that's this is placed at the ditch is just in the background. This is drains about a 30-acre field, and so we've placed our media there, and all the water that leaves the field in the tile drain system will go through that. And we're starting a several-year evaluation project on that, and the same thing for surface waters as well, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. Here we're placing a media filter in a ditch off of a cornfield in Addison County, and so we'll be evaluating this as well. And there's I think there's a lot of interest in these, knowing that sometimes soil test phosphorus in fields can be generally high. It's tough to reduce those soil test levels with even if you're using all the great soil health management practices. So we may need this last line of defense to protect water quality as water leaves a field. Okay, so just a couple more slides here. Talked a lot about how climate change is impacting agriculture and water quality. What I haven't mentioned is how agriculture is impacting climate change. And so if you think about kind of where greenhouse gas emissions come from on the farm, it's really not dominated by diesel fuel usage and electricity and fossil fuel consumption. It's really about 40% or more come from soil emissions, and that's been well documented across the country. And so this is obviously represents a big opportunity for agriculture to potentially reduce these emissions, given that they're their largest source, through things like nutrient management, changing of nitrogen timing, lots of just kind of good solid nutrient management can not only improve water quality, but can lead to potential mitigation opportunities. And the carbon, so there's opportunities with reducing emissions of nitrous oxide, but then there's a lot of unanswered questions around the ability to build carbon in soils that we're very interested in. Farmers are very interested in. There's a lot of optimism about this, I would say, but like some of our other work, we don't have a lot of good evidence for especially the heavy clay soils in Vermont, to what degree we can continue to build carbon and organic matter in those soils. And so we're just started a 6-year project called funded by the U.S. Dairy Net Zero Initiative. So we're one of several land grants in the country working on this. And the idea here is to use all the best soil management practices that we can possibly use in corn silage and hay production, and see if we can sequester as much carbon in our soils as we emit during a feed production cycle during the year. And so to do that, we'll be measuring deep soil carbon, soil health, lots and lots of gas chambers placed everywhere within our study fields. And at the same time, we'll be monitoring water quality on these study fields as well to really get the total picture of how these soil health management practices are impacting soils, water, and gas emissions. And then my last slide, I think that, you know, as we think about climate change and moving forward in Vermont, we have our challenge. We absolutely have our challenges, but it's important for us to, you know, kind of turn around and look outward as well at what's happening in the rest of the country. This is, you know, the drought conditions that are last year in California and the Southwest, and that's where a lot of food is produced in the country. And we are not seeing those effects. And we have a lot of water in Vermont. That's our key challenge. But if we can learn how to manage that water, this excess water on our farms, we will have that water, and we can, I think agriculture can remain vibrant and productive into the future with as long as we, you know, we do our research and we learn how to manage this resource that we seem to be having just a little bit too much of right now. Okay, I think that does it for me. I want to stop sharing. And then I don't know if Denise, if we have any time for questions.
Yep, we have about 15 minutes. So
oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I think this this section was open until 6:15, Josh.
Okay,
So
we started a
opened it
little
up.
early too, didn't we? Yeah.
Yeah, yep.
Yep. Okay. Okay, great.
I see James has his hand up, Katie.
Yeah, that's a great presentation. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. That was a great presentation. As I understand it, kind of in a nutshell, farming, the kind of farming that we've been doing in Vermont looks to be, it's going to get much harder and much less profitable if we don't change fast. You didn't mention the Global Warming Solutions Act, which requires the state to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 26% in a mere 2 years, and then 40% in 5 years after that. As I go around the state, I see the same amount of corn that I've always seen. I think we plant something like 90,000 acres of corn in Vermont, and of course that means nutrients are being added at tremendous amounts, and I do see some cover crops, not a lot, so there's still a lot of bare ground. My question is, how are we going to meet the Global Warming Solutions Act goals, which are not something that these are not hints, these are mandates.
Sure, that's a really good question. Those are very aggressive targets, I guess. And I think, you know, agriculture can certainly play a role. The challenge has been thrown down. I think, you know, we can certainly have an impact with improved nutrient management, and it's those nitrous oxides that I'm, you know, avoiding nitrous oxide emissions is what I'm especially interested in, and improved nitrogen management. So I think we can have some play a role there in agriculture in meeting those goals. You know, there's some opportunities, I think, within manure management systems as well. You know, depending on how quickly we can mobilize and you know, look at things like methane capture and covered manure pits. There may be some opportunities there. They're doing a lot of that in New York State, and we just, you know, there's a lot of work to be done, and we're you know, we're doing our best to try to keep up with it.
Thanks, Josh. James, your hand is still up. Do you want me to lower it, or?
Well, if I have one more shot at that, I'm kind of wondering how we can continue to grow corn at all.
And
goals. In other words, I mean, I appreciate how hard you're working, and others are working, but the state of Vermont, the farmers are importing something like 40,000 tons of artificial fertilizer and some 600,000 tons of feed supplements, which carry a lot of phosphorus. How can we continue to farm that way and meet these mandated goals?
Well, I guess I think I understand what you're saying, but I mean, I think the linkage between corn production and the climate change goals is not entirely clear to me. I think we can have some benefit. We can reduce nitrous oxide emissions, and like the research that I mentioned we're doing, trying to become net zero with a corn silage hay system. But I don't think in any way that that cropping system is responsible for the bulk of the greenhouse gas emissions. I guess yeah.
Other questions or comments? Dr. Henderson, Ken?
Hi, Josh, this is really interesting. For the next 2 years, we have a Lake Champlain Basin Program award to work with farmers and to try to target our water collections to lead us to areas of a certain water basin that may require more investment. It doesn't have near the sophistication that you are achieving with the flow measurements that you are doing on the fields. I'm wondering that with the individual field sampling that you're doing, do you think that there's a way to learn what practices the farmers really trust that are being put on their soils? And can your research lead to ideas on how to further incentivize farms to adopt BMPs?
Yeah, that's a great. The human piece of all this is the most challenging for sure, Kent. Yeah, we, whenever possible, we try to get a social scientist involved in our projects to do some of that, interviewing and survey work with our farmer partners. And I think we're learning more. But the number one thing we've learned is that we're not, to some degree, we can talk our heads off, and that has some effect. But it's really when we have farmer to farmer communication, that's when we gain the most traction with, farmers' willingness to adopt conservation practices. So some of the work, we have a large project now where it's focused with fruit and vegetable growers in the Northeast, but we're working with farmers to really kind of arm them with the most effective cutting edge climate change knowledge. And then they, in turn, go out and actually do some outreach and communication with their, farmers within their communities. And we think that approach may be, the way of the future in some degree for us. And after we've kind of we've gathered the low hanging fruit, then that next, group of individuals is really much more challenging. So it's going to take innovative approaches to get the increased adoption levels. And maybe this farmer to farmer model may be something we can use. I don't know if I answered both of you. I kind of think I maybe heard two questions in there, Kent. I don't know if I caught both of them.
No, you provided really good guidance, and I'm going to remember what you said. But what we're trying to do is to find out what practices the farmers are using and which ones they trust are working the best. And they want to improve, and they want to know which practices, what's next, what can I do next?
Yeah. And
what have I done in the past that has worked, and what can I build on what I've already done? And that's to me, it's a really great way to motivate folks. And I think that you've got a really good audience. You've got some really good conservation farmers in the watersheds you talked about, and the one that we're going to be in. And I'm looking for some big improvements and a way to work with some of the ones that haven't been in compliance or haven't really been able to see the benefit.
Lori, I think your hand was up next, and then Marley, and then Cree.
Thank you, Josh. That was a really terrific presentation. Thank you for the thoroughness and all the details there. And I apologize, I had to arrive a bit late, and so I may have missed this, but I'm wondering if you could talk a bit more about the impacts you're seeing from tile drains. I know you gave some examples, but I think it was from one farm, and I'm wondering when you'll have results from public results from that study. That was a really shocking number for me for nitrogen, and I know we are certainly more focused on phosphorus, understandably, in the Northeast, and it's a limiting factor in Lake Champlain, but nitrogen is also an influence for cyanobacteria. We don't quite understand how. And so those numbers were just of concern, and we don't want to just be narrowly focused on phosphorus. So it was really helpful to see the nitrogen numbers there too. So if you could speak a little more to that, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, so great question. So we have not published those nitrogen numbers. But we have published those phosphorus numbers, and in addition to numbers from three fields and some additional analysis of some rainfall intensity data in a paper in February of 2022 of this year. So I'm glad to share a link to that paper with you. With the nitrogen numbers were one of these kind of we did not set out and in no way thought we would find what we found. So we have not. It just hasn't been the thrust of our work. I think it's really good information, and it's probably impetus for doing a lot more work with nitrogen. But we haven't officially published those yet. So I don't know that we might have missed the boat. We probably should have published them with the phosphorus numbers, but it was our focus. We were just so focused on the phosphorus at that point in time. But that's it's something we can certainly look at, and potentially we definitely are going to take it to farmers and make sure, because that to me, it's if any farmer sees they're losing with the price of nitrogen, if they're losing that much nitrogen, they're going to be motivated to make some changes because it's just too expensive.
Thank you.
Yep. Hey, Marley.
Hey,
Marley
Joshua.
or Cree, yep.
Hey, Marley.
Yeah, good to see you again, and thanks for all of this. One question, some of the practices that you're promoting, reduced tillage, things like that, can be challenging to implement for a farmer who hasn't done it in the past. It's a change in management. It can even cause some losses in the first year or two. Do you think that there could be some value to what we used to call the BMP challenge, where there was an incentive for farmers to try new practices by assuring them that if there were losses in production, that they would be covered in some manner? Do you see any value to that, trying to reinvigorate that plan?
Yeah, I do. I think that in conjunction with, there is that initial hesitancy because of potential lost production. There's also the equipment, piece, right? So, if somehow a BMP challenge could be paired with some, a custom operator would come and do this, no-till operation or whatever the practice is, I think there's potential for that. And primarily because I think, it's a different day than it was when the BMP challenge was first implemented. There's much more awareness of these practices, and maybe it's, maybe there would be more people that would give it a shot, so yeah, I think it's totally worth trying.
Great. I think finally Cree is the last hand I see up. I don't know if you see any others, Katie.
Well, thanks, Josh. It was really comprehensive, and your 3 points about soil cover and organic matter and reduced disturbance. But I have heard, with the need to do the burn down of the cover crops to get insurance for the cash crop. one of the issues with farmers, I mean, an alternative would be roller crimping, but I've heard that farmers say that's very time consuming. I mean, that's just a comment, but my question is really about a slide you showed. And you showed after Irene that there was huge sediment plume coming out of the Connecticut River. And it was very clear there was no plume coming out of the Thames River. Is that just to do with the size of the watershed, or what's in the watershed there?
Yes, I think both. The Connecticut is an enormous watershed, and it stretches and really encompasses so much land area all the way up to Canada. Yeah, I think that's primarily due, well, three things. So yes, watershed composition, size of the watershed, and the way Irene tracked, it did not, it stayed kind of like right up through Vermont, New Hampshire, the bulk of the storm. So I don't think it impacted the Thames watershed near as much either.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah. And I appreciate your comment about roller crimper. We've got we're hoping to be able to do some monitoring work on glyphosate at the Discovery Acres site, and potentially look at some reduced herbicide practices. And I'm not an agronomist. Heather's the one that can really talk about that. But we know there's a lot of interest in that, and so we're trying to incorporate some of that into our monitoring work.
Karina, I see your hand just went up, and then I think we need to move on unless there's other comments, just to stick with our agenda. But go ahead, Karina.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a great presentation, Josh. I did just have one question that came up with a tile drain. You had said there's an increase in tile drain associated with climate change, and I was wondering how much data you actually have that the increase in tile drain is linked to climate change. Having worked as a wetland scientist in the Champlain Valley for 15 years, I've definitely seen a lot of, interest in converting wetlands or non-productive land to production. But I don't know how much that is linked directly to climate change. So I was just curious if you had more data on that.
Good catch. Thank you. So that is my anecdotal observation. And I will say that I did my graduate work in New York State, and I worked with a drainage specialist. One of my primary advisors was a drainage specialist for New York. And it was fascinating to hear kind of a recount of how quickly tile drainage expanded in New York, and it was very, very, very slow to catch on in Vermont until the recent, what I've witnessed is and heard from farmers and contractors is that the past 10 years, especially the past 5 years, it has just really started to increase. And so it is wholly anecdotal, that I think it aligns well with climate change and these wetter conditions. But you totally got me. I have no data to support that.
No, thank you.
Josh. All right. I think, Josh, that was a great presentation. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your data with us. I think did you link that in the chat? Am I missing or the presentation, or will you send it to Katie?
I sent it to Katie.
Okay.
So maybe she can distribute.
Yeah, and if you could send a link, I'll follow up with you after too, but just to that paper you referenced that came out in 2022, that would be great.
Sure, and that presentation is like a really large file size, so you might want to save it as a PDF. That would make it easier. I think there's some photos in there that made it way too big. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and maybe we can do it again in person sometime.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Our next part of the agenda, number 6, is the committee discuss action to take regarding the Quebec CAC's resolution related to governmental public reporting on phosphorus reduction progress in Missisquoi Bay. And I think Pierre is still with us. I see his bubble.
Yeah, Pierre is still here, I think. I'm not sure how much action we're going to be able to take since we don't have a quorum, but this is just a continued discussion of what Pierre shared with us at the July retreat.
I'm still there. I'm there. Just it takes like 5 seconds for my mic to turn on, apparently, on Teams. So sorry about that. Well, I don't know. Do you have quorum? Yes, Lori came in, but you're missing one, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. When we had everyone, we were still one shy. But I wonder, Pierre, if you could talk a little bit about the timeline of the elections.
Yeah, sure.
And
Sure.
if it makes sense to try to discuss this more now or to pick it back up at the November meeting.
Well, what happened since we met, and I talked about that resolution the last time. We had an election in Quebec. Same government was re-elected, but we're pretty sure the Minister of Environment is going to change, and we expect new nominations to be made next week, not the week of October 17th. So by the end of the month, we'll know who the new Minister of Environment will be, and therefore who we want to write the letter to asking the Minister of Environment and also the Secretary of ANR of Vermont to ensure that there are public presentations to both the Quebec public and to the Vermont public about what the plans are for progressing towards achieving the goals of the Quebec-Vermont phosphorus reduction agreement on Missisquoi Bay, what the plans are, where they stand now, and you know, the general situation, and be able to answer all the questions the public would have on, so that we can really inform people on both sides of the border of what's happening on both sides of the border, because we're all stakeholders of those actions, and the improvements in the water quality of Missisquoi Bay will depend on the actions on both sides of the border. So I also personally talked to Julie Moore about it, and to Nathalie Provost, who is the regional director of the Ministry of Environment for our section here, Montérégie. Just telling them that this was happening, and they were all for it. They were happy, and they were saying, well, yeah, we'll gladly do that next summer. So I still think we need to write this letter to people who signed the agreement, and currently it's Julie Moore who signed the agreement, and Benoit Charette, the Minister of Environment at the time. So what I was for was that by the end of October, we could either write separate letters or a joint Quebec and Vermont CAC letter to both the Secretary of ANR and the Minister of Environment. But if you're not ready before November, we can discuss a different approach. So we, at our annual general meeting in June, we passed a motion that was unanimous, and it was from the members in the room, very simply asking the board of directors and me as a chair to write to both the Secretary of ANR and to the Minister of Environment to present within the year, either at our General Assembly or at a specific public meeting they would like to organize themselves, present the results of the work so far and what they plan to do in the next few years.
So sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, Pierre,
Oh,
I'm gonna
okay.
mute you. We're getting a little bit of an echo, I think.
So I think we have to take this up at the November meeting, asking basically, does the Vermont CAC want to ask the same, send us a letter as well, or do we want, I think that's the question to the CAC right now, but we can't really make a decision based on not having a quorum. Go ahead, Lori.
I apologize because you may have covered this territory when I wasn't on, but I thought we did make that decision at the retreat. I know that was a motion I thought that I made that we would move forward on this. So it seems like maybe we, I'm just wondering, do we have to review this, or can we empower, the CAC leadership to work with Pierre on a joint letter? Or
Katie, are you looking at the minutes from the retreat?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, those minutes left my brain as soon as I sent them out, so I will.
I'm sure, and I confess, Katie, that I didn't review them that carefully, but I do remember, and Pierre, maybe you'll remember that, but I know I did speak to that at that meeting. Certainly was my intent that we move forward and that we not delay.
We doesn't look to me like we had a motion. I think folks wanted to review the language that the Quebec CAC put together before making a formal motion on it. But from the conversation, folks were supportive of supporting this,
Right.
but there wasn't a formal motion.
So it seems, though, that, what Pierre's brought forward here is the June language, but we did the intent was to support this. So can't we move forward trying to collaborate on a letter, or do we have to start from scratch addressing this issue again in November? It just seems like we should be able to work on a letter in the interim.
Yeah,
Am I
then
missing
maybe
something?
The motion would be to approve the letter at the November meeting, Lori.
Yeah,
that make
rather
sense?
than delay again.
Seen a thumbs up from Karina. So this isn't a formal motion, but if we could start working on a letter and then get the letter approved at the
Yeah.
November meeting. Okay.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I'll be happy to work with Mark on that. We're not in our organization's not really formal in this type of thing. Like the motion doesn't have whereas
Right.
But you do like you used to do and what your process asks for. But we can work together on a letter, a joint letter. Do I hear?
I'm happy with a joint letter. I don't think we have to do separate ones. I think there has been a desire for us to work as collaboratively as we can. And I guess I'd leave that up initially to the drafters. If you feel like you have, there's certain things that one party wants to emphasize that the other one doesn't have as much knowledge on. But I think this is a general letter saying that, we see this as very important in terms of meeting the requirements of the team MDL and the lake cleanup plan, that this is a big percentage of where a focal area for action, and we need to get regular detailed reports on the steps that are being taken and follow-up actions and what the plan is both in the short and the long term. And we want those made regularly to the community members.
Yeah,
Sounds
regularly
great.
would be like annually, maybe.
Yeah.
Annually, yes.
Yeah. I think we want to specify that regularity, at least annually. Yes.
Yeah, minimum. Yeah.
Yeah.
Minimum annually. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm comfortable with that moving forward if everybody else is on the call, and then we can bring that letter back to the November meeting. So Mark and Pierre, and let us know if you need assistance, Pierre, or if Mark, I'll reach out to Mark after this call.
And Denise, just tell, I'm happy to
Task
help with that as well.
accepted.
Oh, great. Thank you, Lori. Thanks. What were we going to say, Pierre?
I was just saying I accept the task
Thank you. Thank you.
gladly.
Gladly. Good.
Thank
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
We appreciate that. All right. So next is the 2023, unless there's anything else on that item, the 2023 Lake Champlain Action Plan Priorities, Production Process, and Timeline. Is it really that time of year already? Oh my God. Okay. Did we just already that time of year? Yeah, you're right. It is. Okay. So we have our action plan. Katie, do you want to just give us a note? So we work backwards typically, and we try to get it ready for the beginning of the session to schedule meetings in early January or early February, I guess, right, is when we typically go into the legislature. So go ahead, Katie. It seems like you want to.
Yeah, just wanted to recap the last year's process and some key timelines for this next year's process. So last year we started with a small work group who drafted the action plan, and there were work sessions that took place on December 6th, January 3rd, and January 21st. I think we were a little more delayed than we had anticipated, and I think part of that was we had that joint CAC meeting in November, which took a lot of the time away from focusing on the action plan at that meeting. We had the first committee review at our December 13th meeting and January 10th meeting, and then followed up by email to finalize it. The final text went to Elizabeth at the Basin Program on January 27th, and she did a quick turnaround and got us the final formatted copy by February 2nd. So Elizabeth is usually really fast. Once we get her the final language, she can turn around the product. The only thing to consider this year is if we're going to print copies, which we had discussed. I don't remember if Denise, you were on that call, but with Mark and Sarah, we had discussed printing a few hundred copies this year as things are transitioning back into person and hybrid world. So if we do that, we will have to have the action plan text finalized by early January at the latest. So Elizabeth has enough time to format it, not only for web, but also for print, which takes a little bit more time. And then we'll need enough lead time, which is, we've been told about a week to get it to the state for printing. So definitely want to have things wrapped up by early January, I would say. So now's a good time to start.
Okay. I think maybe the first step would be to review last year's. I think that's where we usually start, right? And then I think maybe have part of our meeting in November be dedicated to some planning time for the 2023 action plan. How's that sound to everybody? Is that a thumbs up? Okay. And then we could either lay out a schedule at that meeting. You know, yeah, I think we need to review it and dedicate some time to the November meeting. So everybody's homework would be to look at the action plan from last year. Okay, so that'll be part of our meeting. All right, so next item, any other thoughts on the action plan before we move on? All right, we're a little ahead of schedule. Meeting wrap-up discussion, November meeting dates and topic. Date and topic, I guess one of the topics we already have on there is our action plan and the letter for the Quebec and Vermont government on the phosphorus reduction update for Missisquoi Bay or Lake Champlain. Anything else for a November meeting? Katie, did we have anything from the retreat that we wanted to cover at the November meeting?
So we didn't get to Bob's a presentation on wastewater infrastructure at the July retreat, so we could put that back on the agenda.
Sounds good. Any other suggestions? Lori, your hands up.
Yeah, thank you. I just, given that schedule for the action plan, the fact that this is a new biennium, we'll have new legislators, and I think there's going to be a real need for education. I think we want to make sure that we have enough time devoted to working as a CAC as a whole, I think, on the action plan, because Denise, I know you and I have both in the past chaired these subcommittees, and that sometimes can be a lonely process. And then, it's very time consuming going out through many different iterations. So given that we're going to go to print, and given how many of the people who are CAC representatives have a really busy, November, December, and January, it just seems like I think we want to get as far as we can in November moving forward on the action plan. It's just my thought on that, and use our upcoming November and December meetings to really be disciplined about moving through that, and not, if we have an active, engaged subcommittee group who's able to meet outside of that, that's wonderful. But if we don't, I think we've got to really dedicate those meetings to advancing the action plan.
And so sorry, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I agree with Lori. I mean, we need to spend some time on this action plan. It's going to take a while, and we need to use the time as valuable time as best we can. And so I think we should get started in November.
Yeah, I definitely found the most useful meetings for the action plan last year was when we had time to read it in between iterations and then actually talk, because I think that's where the best edits came from, as opposed to emailing it out and asking people to give feedback. It was definitely a better process, I think, and product when we actually had an opportunity to talk to each other with the action plan in front of us, with iterations. So I'm comfortable with dedicating November and December to the action plan. Do other people feel like you need education between now and then? Or can we maybe, in January, starting in January, start with our education back up after the action plan is final and drafted? And again, we don't have a quorum, so Mark's not here. So we're sort of making decisions, but I'm comfortable with that because it's a lot of work. And I think we tend to tweak it every year to make it stronger and better. So sorry, my dog is saying hello. She's right here. So I'm seeing thumbs up from everybody. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep. And we have new members on the committee, so I think it's a good idea to maybe take some time over the next 2 months, and I'm comfortable with that. So no need to meet early. I remember a couple of years where we came in early, but really taking the full hour and a half for November and December and dedicating it to the action plan, minus the letter, because I do want to make sure we get the letter done in November as well. Okay.
Sounds good.
Katie, I think we can propose that to Mark and see what he says.
Yeah, so would we still try to pull together a small group to work on it in between those two main meeting sessions, or are we just gonna go with trying to get everybody to do it together?
Let's see how it goes in November.
Okay.
So send out last year's, people give feedback and edits before November's meeting. Then in November, we can draft it. And if we feel like we
You muted yourself. Or your dog did, not sure.
I'm just like playing on my keyboard. She's never done this before. I don't usually do meetings in my bedroom, but my kids are all home. I didn't want to be in the kitchen. And my house is cold, so I don't know where my thoughts were going. So yeah, let's see how November goes. And if we feel like we need a small committee to actually convene and do some deeper editing after that, Katie, so it's not just left on you, then we can do that.
Sounds good.
Is there anything else? We can't vote on anything. Is there anything else that anybody wants to talk about tonight? Or do we want to take back 20 minutes? Yeah, all right. I'm seeing thumbs up on that. Okay,
Yes.
great. All right, well, it's nice to see all of you. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you. You too.
Thank
Take
you
care.
all.
Everybody.
Bye.
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 Bye.